to make it an intentional change, you need to know what it is that you're trying to produce. Right? And thirdly, a ritual. The techniques are examples of rituals. A process, an experience together, going through something. The techniques, step by step. He uses ritual, I think, from his background in studying with many cultures. It's a word that I think a lot of people use for going through some kind of process to make a change. Yeah? And then I would add a fourth, which is, guess what? Ecology. Which might be assumed in rapport, but I'd rather just state it. You know, I think it's really important to make sure that ecology is handled, managed, dealt with, addressed, you know, in order to make it most possible for that change to occur. So when somebody comes to me, sometimes they want something, and they want it now. And then we start working and we find this thing and that thing and these objections and resistances, and it's like, I can't help you get that thing right now because we have to deal with this, that, and the other thing. And sometimes it can be very disappointing. You know, well, I thought NLP was fast. Well, it is when we deal with the whole picture, the whole landscape. Change doesn't occur like that, right? We say change occurs in the specific, and then I just said it doesn't. What I mean is, yes, it changes in the specific as long as it's congruent with the general, with everything else that's going on in the system, right? So if this change is not congruent with the entire system, it probably won't occur, because something else will force it back the other direction. Yeah? So we make change in the specific, and then it generalizes to the system. Like, yeah.
When we were working on the phobia exercise, we really weren't doing much of an ecology check with it. Is that sort of an exception? Do you just, like if somebody comes in and says they're afraid of snakes, would you do a big ecology check?
You didn't do an ecology check?
Well, we did like cautionary things afterwards, like...
That's the ecology.
Okay.
Right. Like, once you're not afraid of snakes anymore, are you going to walk up and pick them up? Right? Or spiders, are you going to play with them?
But it's not something you would deal with beforehand.
It's absolutely something you deal with beforehand. You have the person consider, once this is changed, you know, what's going to happen? How are you going to respond to this change? If you no longer fear heights, are you going to walk up to the edge of cliffs and just lean over? Right?
But if I'm remembering correctly, we were doing that afterwards. So
Okay.
I was just wondering...
We were.
You did it afterwards?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were handling the ecology, just building it in at the end of the process. You can build it in at the beginning too. The ecology really for that one is, that probably should be done is, do you want to make this change? Do you want to not fear this thing anymore? You know, is there any secondary gain to fearing it? We do that a lot, say, with the allergy process. You know, somebody has an allergy to cats, and their, you know, mother-in-law has a cat. So as long as I keep my allergy, I don't have to go over to her house. Right? We have major generalizations about mother-in-laws. That's why I brought that up, because we're all familiar with that one. It's not necessarily true, but... Right? So there's secondary gain sometimes to having an allergy. There's secondary gain that might be part of having a phobia to something. You know? But typically, people want to get rid of those kinds of fears. Those kinds of natural reactions to something that is not really serving them across the board. And then you can build the ecology in afterwards. So now, you know, now that you're not afraid of spiders anymore, you still want to be respectful of them, right? You still want to consider that. or you've just handled, a bee sting, and the person used to go into, or might go into anaphylactic shock. You want to make sure that if they're in the environment of bees, they're still careful, and they still take their, medicine and so on, just in case it didn't fix the dilemma. That's the ecology of it again. Some of the processes naturally have ecology built in, some don't. So that's why it's important to keep it as a frame. Okay. So, ready to move on? So, complete piece of change is our next piece. And then tomorrow we're going to do some work with metaphor. So the complete piece, what that means is using everything that you've learned so far. This is your first sort of go at putting it all together. We don't expect mastery here. We expect you to use your notes. But we're asking you now to begin the process of putting all that you've got so far into one piece. Because in my practice, for example, people don't walk in and I don't say, "Do you have something that fits this structure?" And they go, "Yeah," and then I just do that technique. And then I go, "Do you have something that fits this one?" And then I do that. No. I find out what's going on for them, don't I? I find out what they want. And then I have to choose the process. Right? Then I have to choose, what am I going to do? And a lot of people towards the end of practitioner start asking the question, what do I do when? Which technique do I use for what? There is no map of that other than what's presented to you. Because the presentation of something is the structure of it. And now you have to go back in your card catalog or your memory, whatever you've got there, of all the techniques that you've learned and really examine what are the structures of those techniques. What's a swish pattern for? What's a 6-step reframing for? What's a change personal history for? What's a new behavior generator for? What kinds of things might this work for? That's mastery, is beginning to make those structures match up. What's being offered to you and your repertoire of tools, and beginning to match them together. Is there any right answer? That's definitely a conflict integration and that's what you have to do. No. You could do something else. If we had 10 practitioners in the room and we all dealt with the same person, we might come up with 10 different things that we were going to do with them. Based on what we were attending to in the moment, based on what we thought was going to be the biggest change, or based on that we thought we could change something small, a step at a time. Yeah? So give yourselves a lot of permission, a lot of freedom around this process. The most important part is the information gathering part, not the technique itself. Because if you do that part well, the change starts happening already. Anybody?
History in the medical.
Sorry?
Like taking history in the medical.
Taking a history in the medical field? Beginning to really find out what's the story that's going on. And as we've emphasized, I think, many times in here, we're not so much interested in the content. Right? We're not interested in all that they're telling us about the content of the issue. Whether it's about a business transaction or whether it's about a issue with a child or whatever. We're not interested so much in that. We're interested in the structure of it. How is it that they have it stored? What triggers what? When the child acts a certain way, then they have an emotion, and so then they act in a certain way. That's what we're working with. Not so much what they say to each other, but how they do it. Right? So, when you're examining these, the present state, have you seen this before? PS plus R equals DS. this is the basic structure of what we're doing in here. Usually somebody gives us a present state. That's what they come in with. Here's what's going on, and here's what I want. And so what I want is the well-formed outcome, right? That's where outcomes comes in. That's where we use the meta model to ask qualifying questions, to make distinctions, to chunk down, to get specific. What do you really want? And then where do you want it? How do you want it? So these should, right? So we kind of look at what's the difference between where they are and where they're going. How are those different? How are they the same? Compare and contrast these two pieces. The intervention is here when we establish what's the resource that we need to bring to this in order to move them from the present state to the desired state. What technique am I going to utilize to help bring that resource into their experience such that the change occurs? Okay? So that's what R is, the resource that I'm going to bring, and I'll use some intervention, some technique to make that happen, to help make that happen. Here are the things that we're going to do. We're going to establish rapport. We're going to maintain it throughout the interaction. We're going to use our sensory acuity to help calibrate to the congruencies and incongruencies, to the emotional states that we're seeing, so we can really see the difference between the present state and the desired state. We want to see physiological differences, don't we? We want to hear tonal changes, language changes between the present state and the desired state. Okay? We're going to use our flexibility, the ability to ask questions, the ability to make adjustments, to exaggerate things in certain needs, to break states in certain moments, to help guide their experience so that we can get what we need to get. We're going to explore ecology with them. We're going to keep ecology in mind. How is this relevant to the system in which this change is in operation or is being considered? We're going to establish a well-formed outcome, the desired state. And I want you to use your notes. Section 2, page 14 through 16. All the questions are there. You don't have to do it free form. Forget who it was. Maybe it was Bandler who said that the information gathering part was 90% of the work. Once you get to the intervention, it's just taking somebody through a process. Right? But the setup, if you get the right process, or the one that feels the best, if you get the information that you need, then the change already starts to occur. Get the outcome clear. Gather information then about the present state. So then you can compare and contrast the two. What's different about where you are than where you want to be? So then we can compare and contrast those. Then we come up with what process or technique matches the structure best in your opinion. So are they telling me about a conflict and a decision that they're having trouble making because of the conflict? So what they want is to make a decision about something. The present state is that they've got this conflict that's preventing the decision. So, conflict integration, right? They've got a situation where every time their child does a particular thing, they react in a particular way. What they want is to be able to react more resourcefully. What structure does that fit? Could be a new behavior generator. Could be a circle of excellence.
Could be switch.
Swish? How so?
Which I mean, with the new resource for case response.
Okay, so
Angry or whatever, like negative response to be in positive response.
good. So you're proposing that the swish could be used by saying that the trigger is that person's facial expression or that person's tone of voice. And then what I want to do